Welcome to this presentation on MC3D. MC3D is a Stage 3D framework that augments MadComponents. There are 9 kinds of effects in MC3D, from basic smooth list scrolling and navigation page slides, and beyond to much more powerful transitions and experiences. So here's a demo video that shows what you can do with MC3D. A couple of notes about the video you've just seen. All of the buttons and controls on the pages are real. This isn't just transitions between static images. These UI forms are just MadComponents layouts, so you can design, arrange, and style them exactly like you need for your application. They can look like anything you like. So my presentation today is divided into 4 topics. First, I'll introduce MadComponents and how to build something with a MadComponents XML layout. Then, I'll briefly talk about GPU render mode, just to contrast with the rest of my presentation, which is all about direct render mode and Stage 3D. Having laid the foundations, I can talk about MC3D itself. And finally, I'll talk about some of the current limitations of using Stage 3D. So what is MadComponents? MadComponents is a popular framework that developers are mostly using to build mobile applications, but you can also use it in the browser or on the desktop via Adobe Air. A lot of developers have used it to build applications, both public apps that are out there on app stores and also enterprise apps for internal use. So MadComponents is a mature framework. It's lightweight, free and open source, easily extensible, and the UI will automatically adapt to different screen sizes, orientation, and pixel density. MadComponents itself is not Stage 3D based. It's written for the display list. But it provides very good performance in GPU render mode, even on Retina displays. MadComponents apps typically start up very quickly. They're very economical in their use of memory. And there are a few mechanisms that give the developer more control over memory management. Also, MadComponents simplifies communication with the server. It's a lot faster and easier to write a UI for MadComponents than it is to write HTML and CSS. The XML layout language allows you to describe powerful things simply and succinctly. For example, a navigation-based app would be written like this. I've always been really impressed by GPU render mode, the way it allows you to write conventional display list apps and exploit hardware-accelerated graphics. Now, while developers reported very little improvement with Flex apps, GPU render mode really makes a big difference with MadComponents. So for most mobile apps, MadComponents plus GPU render mode is good enough. So this is why I took MC3D in a different direction, of using Stage 3D to do new stuff, not just improved list scrolling and page slides. So how does GPU render mode work? Well, Adobe have created some clever algorithms that convert display list graphics to hardware accelerated vectors and textures. There are two mechanisms at play. CPU rasterize is where you capture the texture on the display list and upload these textures to the GPU. That mechanism isn't too different to what I'm doing in MC3D. The other mechanism is where vector graphics are drawn directly to the GPU. Now that's a lot faster than CPU rasterization, so it's a pity you can't exploit these capabilities in direct render mode. MC3D was inspired by the kinds of cool user experiences that developers are creating, particularly on tablet devices. Slick, fluid, and immersive user experiences. I realized that this was an area where the Flash platform could be much more powerful than HTML5, and I wanted to provide these experiences out of the box, free and open source. MC3D is built directly on top of Stage 3D APIs. Dealing with Stage 3D directly opens up capabilities that you wouldn't have if you were using Starling. You can exploit 3D geometry. You can build custom shaders for effects like motion blurring to make list scrolling appear more natural. Also reflections, and also shader programs that do animation rather than doing animation using ActionScript. Shaders are faster. I'd like to talk now about Stage 3D bottlenecks and how they affect MC3D. MadComponents is rendered and rasterized on the display list. Each surface is divided up into squares before uploading to Stage 3D. The benefit of this scheme, using squares, is that if the UI changes, then we only have to update the squares that change, not the entire surface. Unfortunately, uploading textures is a little slow. It's slower than GPU rasterization if we were able to use that. And while it would be possible to use geometric shaders for vector graphics, that wouldn't solve the problem of text. So this is why I use textures. By the way we use textures in MC3D is different from if we were writing a game. Now, Adobe are focused on games, so Stage 3D is very good at that. Most games are economical in their use of textures. The textures are static usually in a game, and they don't change. We upload them at the start, and we can speed things up here by using ATF encoding. In MC3D, textures are created dynamically at runtime, so we can't use ATF compression. And because we have many textures inside a surface, many of these square texture areas, we need to set the textures inside the render loop. We also have limited texture memory, and user interfaces need a lot of texture. So it's likely that we have to recycle texture memory, and this also happens inside the render loop. Because we've got all this processing inside the render loop, that can reduce the frame rate. So that's a bottleneck. Let's look at an example where this bottleneck might affect us. Now, lists often employ texture recycling. Of course, bottlenecks in list scrolling aren't ideal, because we want the experience of scrolling the list to be as smooth as possible. Fortunately, MC3D does a pretty good job of masking any degradation by employing effects like motion blurring. I think in summary, the only thing I'd really like to say is that the Flash platform is really quite powerful, and it really has some unique capabilities where HTML5 can't really compete. So thank you very much. I hope you'll be interested enough in MC3D to come along to the blog or see you at the Facebook group. That's all. Bye.